And I just want to share a little bit of background about the Rapid and let you know and discuss in some detail some of our experiences over the last 2 to 3 years at the ballot box and some of the results of not only our successful initiatives, but then some anti-transit initiatives that came on the heels of that. So, and one of the things I do want to highlight, I work for the agency in Grand Rapids in the metro region, so we are bound by that limitation of not being able to fully advocate. We have to go out there and educate and tell people about our proposal and tell them about what we want to do, but we can't tell anyone to vote yes. So that's where you have to rely on coalitions like the ones you're talking about building here. And so it's critically important to define those roles. And if you can find a partner in the agency, really try to do that. Try to hone that relationship and make sure you know the legal boundaries. But if as much as you can work together, it's a really good thing. So just to give you some background, if you're not familiar with the Rapid, we are a regional transportation system, albeit much smaller than what you're talking about here. We consume part of Kent County, but not the whole county. You guys are talking about 4 counties, so the size and scope of what we do is quite a bit smaller than what you do. But it's this 6-city area that we refer to. Grand Rapids is the largest population, the largest tax base, kind of the gorilla in the room. I consider it a good gorilla. It's always helps us pass these initiatives, and it's a community that tends to get it. But these other 5 cities, East Grand Rapids, Granville, Kentwood, Walker, and Wyoming, they're suburbs, but it's all very connected, which is why we have a regional system in the first place. And to give you an idea of how this came about, the Rapid formed in the year 2000, so we're only about 13 years old. Prior to that, we were the Grand Rapids Area Transportation Authority, GRATA, as we call it locally. And that at that time in the late 90s, and I think it started operating in the 70s, really limited service, really bare bones transportation service. No buses running after 6 p.m. on weekdays, no buses on Sundays, early hours on Saturdays. I mean, we're talking bare bones. So the mayor of Grand Rapids at the time, John Logie, a very progressively minded guy for the year 2000 in my mind, he went to the mayors of these other 5 cities and said, look, it's time for us to build a regional system here. We have to start taking transportation seriously. So he got all 5 of these mayors in a room together for a couple months at a time, and they got them all to agree to a proposal to a millage rate. We're funded primarily by property tax millages for those out-of-state folks. That's what we're kind of bound to in Michigan. Sales tax is not an option for us here, so we're a little bit limited in that regard. But he got all these mayors to agree to, okay, we'll take this to our city council, we'll try to get it put on the ballot, and we'll go out there and advocate for it. So asking people to raise their taxes. What happened in that time, when we were successful in the year 2000, this is what we've been able to build ever since. I'll talk in more detail about our subsequent millage efforts. We've had, since 2000, we've had 5, but they all have really filled in a huge latent demand that existed in our community. So this increase in ridership from about 4.5 million rides in 2000 to just 11.9 million last year, that's a direct result of not only the successful ballot initiatives and then the investments that followed, but just the fact that there was a demand for transit in our region that was not being met. So we're very fortunate in this regard, and this has a lot to do with the folks that were pushing these initiatives throughout the year. These are the results of the first 4. I'll talk in a little more detail about what happened in 2011 down the road a little bit here. But just wanted to give you a little rundown of what we were dealing with, how big of a voter universe we were dealing with. And then you see in 2009, we actually had a failed millage. So these first 3, 2000 was the one to form the authority and for citizens of those 6 cities to agree to taxing themselves. 2003 and 2007 were a renewal of that millage and an increase of that millage. One question on the ballot, but that was all packaged around system-wide service enhancements. So we were able to go out to these communities and say, if you raise this millage rate, you're going to get X, Y, and Z throughout the system. 2009 was different in the sense that we went out for a renewal and an increase, but the increase was only to fund the operations of a bus rapid transit system, which we are now building. But in 2009, that went down by about 1,300 votes, and it was a pretty close election, and it was a very difficult election for the Transit Authority to message from an educational standpoint, and for the Friends of Transit, who are the kind of the campaign arm of this. It was difficult for them to message too for a couple of reasons. Primarily, the bus rapid transit line was only going to go through 3 of the 6 communities. So while everyone in this room understands the value of a single mode that might not go everywhere, we all know that there's positive effects throughout the entire system. That was hard for us to communicate to these communities. Also, bus rapid transit is a relatively new concept to really the United States, frankly, but certainly to Michigan. The line that we're able to build now is going to be the first bus rapid transit line in Michigan. So we were doing it was a short timeline, and it was really hard to kind of make the case to the voters, and it made for a very easy no campaign. To the excuse me, to the point made in the earlier presentation, this was an easy one to just go out there and say, hey, this is a boondoggle. This is only going to help 3 of the communities. Vote no. You know, so that's what happened in 2009. And the Friends of Transit that I mentioned, I think that's really relevant to this group, because what you're trying to build right now is some sort of organization, as you mentioned, C3 or C4, whatever it ends up being. You need to have that structure, and you're going to need to have buy-in from a much larger audience than the Friends of Transit in the Grand Rapids metro region had to have buy-in. But that's where you're going to raise your money. That's who's going to go out and tell people to vote yes. That's who's going to knock doors, all that good stuff. And they were here from the beginning. They formed in 2000, so there was a structure there for us throughout the years. When the initiative went down in 2009, the Rapid did a very smart thing, in my opinion. And just for context, I came on board with the Rapid in November of 2010. So obviously, if I would have been there in 2009, it would have passed, right? No, not even close. But after this happened, the Rapid internally kind of took a look inside and said, okay, we went out there with a project that we planned, that we know is important, that we know is good for the community, but we didn't solicit a ton of public involvement on it. We didn't get the opinion of the voters on whether they really wanted this project or were ready for this project. So following that failed ballot initiative, the Rapid underwent a new long-term planning process. We engaged the public in a variety of ways, open houses, online surveys, written surveys. We made a citizen stakeholder group that was about 30 people, met every month. This is big business leaders, kind of grass tops folks, people from our universities, nonprofit stakeholders, community activists. We really tried to cast a very wide net and went through this long-term planning process to cast a new master plan for the next 20 years that would ideally start in 2010. And that laid the groundwork for us to say, what do you want out of your transit system for the next 20 years? What do you want to see the Rapid do? Where do you want to see us go? How do you want to see us run? Instead of, hey, here's a bus rapid transit project, fund this. So at the end of this process, we had a very comprehensive master plan that we are now using as a kind of the blueprint for our development. And our board adopted that in the summer of 2010. And then in 2011, I'll tell you about the initiative that followed. Essentially what we were able to do is say, hey, here's the plan you wrote. It's time to fund it. What do you think? So there was a lot more buy-in. There was a lot more stakeholder. They took more ownership of the actual proposal, much more so compared to 2009. So what we were asking, this is where it gets very interesting for me. If you look at this, the ask, in my opinion, was relatively modest. Okay, so we're asking for a 0.35 mil increase, which translates to the dollar amount you see there if you have a $100,000 home taxable at $50,000. I mean, we're talking about asking people, on average in the metropolitan area, we're probably saying from the lower end of a $50,000 home up to a $500,000 home, the average increase over the course of the year was going to be anywhere from $25 to $75 for people. So it's not much, but nonetheless, it's increase in taxes. And then if you look at the context of other millage rates, you know, we're certainly not the highest in Michigan, but this was still it was a heavy lift. It should have been easier, but it flat out just wasn't. We got it on the ballot by our board of directors. The way we're governed, they can put something on the ballot. So they voted to approve that in January, and there was a lot of back and forth about, should we go in May, should we go in November, what is the school system doing? They might be going to the ballot with an initiative. A lot of back and forth, and then we ended up, internally I was advocating for November. I'm like, we need more time, we got to get out there and do a lot of education. They said, oh, let's do it in May, you know. And so we had 90 days to do an educational campaign. The Friends of Transit had 90 days to do a pretty robust ground campaign and an advocacy campaign. And it was certainly not easy. The lay of the land at the time, I'll talk a lot about our opposition. I'll talk a little bit about this untapped grassroots network that we were able to really activate. But one of the things, you know, that was really politically relevant is we're doing this 6 months after the November elections of 2010. When the Tea Party took over the world and everyone said we should not spend money on anything ever again for anything. And we're going to the ballot 6 months later to say, hey, you want to raise your taxes? So that was interesting. The third bullet point here, I think, is probably the most important, because you'll see down the road how this all connects. There's a group of people in Grand Rapids working in multiple disciplines, and I know you have the same thing here in Metro Detroit. People working on poverty issues, homelessness issues, nutrition issues, park space, everything you can imagine. There's good advocates doing that work everywhere. What was happening in Grand Rapids, a lot of that work is done through philanthropy, through public-private partnerships. there had not been, to my knowledge, a real political issue for that group of people to galvanize around. So transit became that in 2011. We were really fortunate in that regard that people just kind of said, you know what, transit's important. We're all progressive. We all believe in infrastructure investment. So we're going to take all our talents, and this grassroots network that was there but not really organized, that happened for us. And then the last bullet point, really, we've got more students and younger people moving into the Grand Rapids metro region. Our business leaders, frankly, a lot of old white guys, stereotypical what you might think. However, a lot of these business leaders that are very recognized in our community, they get it. They understand that transit infrastructure is important, not only for economic competitiveness, but for talent attraction and retention. So the more you can identify those types of players here, inform them, educate them, and arm them with the information they need to be your third-party messengers as well. So a little bit about our opposition. Then you're going to see a lot of screenshots from MLive or the Grand Rapids Press here, and I got to admit, as I was putting this together, I'm like, having flashbacks, and just, you get to the office in the morning, there'd be a terrible story about the ballot initiative, whatever. But the Kent County Families for Fiscal Responsibility. As you mentioned, there's always the people that are going to say no out there. And these guys, I don't know a ton about them other than they were a relatively small minority of people in our community, but very vocal, very organized. They had the support of some of the lawmakers you see here. Dave Agema was a local state representative of ours. Some of you may know him from some recent exploits in the news. But long story short, for his last few years in the state house, he was the chair of the appropriations subcommittee on transportation. So every time he got a chance, he would take a whack at transit and try to cut funding. He doesn't believe in it, I don't think, which is fine. But all that to say that there was not just a grassroots opposition effort, there was some higher level elected officials. And these guys, they put their information out in a variety of ways. They have this website called ITP Watch. ITP stands for the Interurban Transit Partnership, which is our technical name. Thank God we don't use that. We do business as the Rapid. But they would put information out, frankly, that was false. And our buses are 90% empty. We are the least efficient transit system in the history of the world. Our CEO gets paid too much. This is all terrible. You should never vote for this. And while on its face, that seems, okay, well, that's a little ridiculous. No one's listening to that. That's not the way it played out at all. The media took this group as the credible opposition. They would print stories about how they thought we should do our planning and professional transit industry things that there was no qualification for. But long story short, you have to get out in front of these opponents. Otherwise, their message is going to exist in a vacuum, and you're going to be on your heels the entire time, which is generally a losing proposition. So to give you just a little idea of this, the Grand Rapids Press loved this conflict. People are clicking on these stories, so they loved every time these guys would fire off a press release, there'd be a story. And if we weren't there to combat it, it could be the smallest thing that you might not think is newsworthy, and it would get printed. Give you an idea of kind of the treatment of our opposition in the media. This is written by the three gentlemen that more or less head up this opposition organization. You read this headline, it's an op-ed, right? The Rapid needs efficiency, transparency, not a tax hike. Seems like relatively reasonable. Like, oh, I should read that. Maybe it will sway my decision. This seems like I should learn about this, based on a lot of their misinformation, what have you. This was about 7 days before the election. The day before the election, this runs. Supporters of the Rapid tax, so not a transportation millage proposal, not an investment proposal, not the kind of messaging we would like, troll for support from the Grand Rapids Public School Board. So I don't know what you guys think of when you hear the word troll, but I think of creepy guys doing creepy things in creepy places. But this is what we were dealing with from a media perspective. And the Friends of Transit were out there, and they were active, but they'd been around for so long, since 2000, that I think there was just a sense of the media being used to hearing from these guys all the time. And they're the transit people, so the new opponents are more interesting. Let's give them better airtime or more airtime. I'm not sure how the decisions were made, but that's kind of how it played out. So we identified this very early on in the campaign, and we thought, okay, it's time, as was mentioned in a couple other presentations, we can't have the agency out there saying, no, we're good. Believe us, we're good. We promise. We needed third parties, and we needed outside messengers, so we had to engage different groups. The grassroots component comes in, but one of the things we were able to do, and it's been mentioned here, we were able to assemble a group of business leaders, all under our former Congressman, Vern Ehlers. We got a hold of Vern. He was our congressman in the Grand Rapids metro area in the 3rd District for about 18 years. Very reasonable Republican, well-liked on both sides of the aisle. He had just recently retired. We now have Congressman Justin Mich, which that's great. But For those of you who don't know him, look him up. But so what Vern helped us do was put together a group of business leaders and community, very recognizable business folk. And we didn't go to this group and say, hey, we need you to support this ballot initiative for a couple reasons. One, that'd be illegal because we're the agency, we can't do that. But also, some of these folks, they'll come out and talk, they'll say the right things, but they might not necessarily want to take a position on a ballot initiative. So if they wanted to do that with the Friends of Transit on their own, that was fine. But what we were able to do with them is these are smart business people that get it conceptually, but they need the information. They need to dial into the proposal. They need to be able to defend this concept when they're at a cocktail party. So that was essentially how we focused this. We got these people together. We took them to a couple events. We did presentations for them. We just inundated them with information, and they turned into a powerful set of advocates that we still engage today. So they meet a couple times a year. I'll give them a lot of information, and they're raising their transit IQ, and they are becoming. Actually, frankly, we modeled it after what they've done in Salt Lake. They had the Chamber of Commerce out there take the lead on a lot of this, and then you get business voices saying this is important. So that was critical for us. Now to the grassroots piece of it, this symbol we came up with. A colleague of mine who works in our planning department. Okay, we'll blow through this. Just to get at this real quick, we were getting very frustrated by the fact that we couldn't go out and tell people to vote yes. It's frustrating. You work for the agency and you're seeing yourself get beat up all the time. And we literally said, we just need like a Facebook profile picture image or something that we can let's just wear the banner. We're all on the same team. Let's come up with something fun. So we came up with this. We both changed our profile pics, and then within a day or two, we're getting emails from friends. People are downloading it. People are using it, and it started to be this kind of ubiquitous symbol that took off, especially on social media. I'm going to show you some quick social media slides. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Facebook is going to save the day and pass initiatives, but it's important. It's certainly a component of it. And the information campaign that I told you we did with the business leaders, we did the same thing with the grassroots folks. We gave them online resources, educated them as much as possible so that they could go out and be our voice. And the result was we started to witness, without any we had no part of this, we started to witness like these extensive debates on Facebook, not only on our webpage, but on the opposition's Facebook page. And I mean, some of these turned into full-on knife fights, and it was hilarious. Our advocates would be on there saying, this is ridiculous, you guys are just anti-transit, and this is what you want to happen organically, and it actually did with us. So you'll see here, this is one of those lengthy conversations. Again, it gets longer and longer, and these people are going back and forth. And you don't want to get too far into the weeds on it, but what it does is it shows that there's momentum out there, because there was certainly more of our supporters than there were negative supporters. This is one of my favorite ones. This guy took the time to write like an essay on lies I've caught the bus no campaign in. Unbeknownst to us, he's posting this, he's sharing, he's putting it on our page, he's putting it on their page, but this is the level of involvement and dedication you can get from people in the social media world if you provide the information and provide a couple things to share around the right way. This is one of my favorites. I just wasted 10 plus minutes reading political rhetoric and lies and blah, blah, blah. And then if you look into his second comment down there, I was really unsure how I wanted to vote until I started reading their BS about the bus/bus system. Now I'm totally a yes, and I hate increased taxes. Whether or not he was being a little dramatic remains to be seen, but this is what you can develop if you provide the right amount of information, at least from the agency's perspective. And then, as you saw in the media coverage, the TV coverage was very similar. We were dealing with the same thing, a lot of credibility given to our opposition. So we had to seek out online media that was geared towards a little more technically savvy population. So these come from Rapid Growth Media. It's a weekly online publication in Grand Rapids. I think you have a sister publication here called Model D, if I'm not mistaken. So you find those people that support you, and you can get your information out there. That's the guy there. He's the one that came up with the Yes logo. He's our planner. So this had nothing to do with it had to do with the millage proposal, but not advocating. It just, here's some information. Here's Transit 101. That's a guy that works for an architecture firm that just expounded on the values of transit. So you can create these things. And what you get in the end, with our campaign at least, and you'll see on the next slide, every little teeny thing you do matters. And the reason why is because you could have over 34,000 people turn out for an election and you could only win by 136 votes. So that's what happened. That's me. I tried to turn from the camera, but all this to say, every single piece of education you do matters, and you have to be targeted about it. You're only going to have limited time to work. And frankly, you just have to make sure you get in front of as many people as possible and get the information out there. Real quickly, I want to blow through a couple things that happened after this. So Same opposition group, when we were successful in 2011, in the fall of that year, they organized to try to gather signatures to get one of our member cities to remove themselves from the authority, which you don't want to break down a regional authority. It's bad for everybody. They were not successful to get signatures the first time, but then the next year they went back and tried in 2 other communities, and they got on the ballot in one of them. So we're back where we were. We're talking about the values of public transit. We're trying to convince people that it's important to their community. And to give you a little context, this is how the city of Walker, who had a question last fall to remove themselves from the authority, this is how they voted historically on millage renewals and increases. Obviously, a renewal and or increase is dramatically different from do you want to have public transportation or not. But the result was very encouraging in the sense that 73% of the voters in Walker said, we're not leaving the authority, and that I'll tell you, I was surprised by that. It was pretty impressive to see that level of support. But one of the things that happened was that grassroots network we built, and some of those business leaders, some of that network that we built, they didn't go to sleep after the 2011 election. They stayed active, they stayed informed, we stayed engaged with them. So when this came up, it wasn't a scramble to defend this, it was just a reactivation of existing advocacy infrastructure. So from that perspective, it's you have to lay that groundwork and you have to stay out there, which leads finally just to these points, which you guys all know, but you have to be out there all the time. You have to be, if you're not talking about a proposal to enhance your service, you need to be talking about how good your service is, talk about new things you're trying to do, make sure you're educating your advocates, be proactive with the media. They're gonna write stories, so stay in front of them. Make them get sick of you in a good way. Don't pester them, but give them so much information that they know they have at least a set of the facts that you want them to use. Empower your stakeholders, empower your advocates with information. Transit IQ, we talk about that in our community. This is a room full of transit nerds and political junkies, and I say that as a compliment because I'm one too, and it's awesome. But when you get outside this room, people don't understand transit the way we do, so you have to give them that information. And then the planning process, and I think this is going to be really relevant for you all as well, and I'm not sure how the RTA is going to approach it. And I've heard that it may be a little less open than it needs to be. But if you can engage as many community members in the planning process so that it's not some planners in a conference room plotting out routes and frequencies and whatnot, go out into the neighborhoods, go out to the institutions, go to community meetings, and let people plan their own transit system. Ask them where they want the buses to run. Ask them what times they want the buses to run. Give them ownership of it. I know that's going to be a heavier lift here because it's a much bigger scope, but the more you can push the RTA towards that sort of planning process, the more buy-in you'll have from the community. And that's just a reality. So as much as you can do that, I think that's very, very helpful. Sorry to blow through this so quickly, but maybe we have time for a question or two. This is my info. Please feel free, if we don't get to anything here, contact me. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to share our story. And hopefully, maybe we can give some advice that can be helpful. But any questions?
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
I was wondering if you guys have data. Oh, there we go. If you guys have data that shows ridership increases and vehicles on the road decreases and vehicles
for like mode shift,
yes,
kind of stuff.
That's connected to the millages.
Yeah, we don't have really vehicle miles traveled decrease information. We don't have that monitoring. We'd have to rely on like MDOT or maybe our local MPO, but we certainly do have ridership information following the implementation of these services. So we passed in 2011, and by the end of 2012, all of the enhancements were on the road, except for our BRT project, which we're building now. But so we took about 3 or 4 routes that were ending at 7, 8 o'clock, bumped those up to 11 p.m., saw 40 to 50% ridership increases on those. We increased rush hour frequency on a handful of routes, and almost, you can't say it's direct, but it was, if you monitor ridership on the specific places where we put new service in, dramatic increases.
Does anyone in this room have statistics from anywhere in the country? Because I've asked Bill Kirk Steidl about this, our director of MDOT here, how to compare per mile, or you figure out the way to compare per mile to build and operate a transit system or a tracks, say, versus an interstate. So I often think when I'm driving on 94, I'm driving down the lodge, I'm thinking, crap, this should be should have a parallel spot for transit, but it doesn't. And so I'm thinking, how can we compare those and get stats which probably show that it's much more cost effective, move more people, all these other reasons?
Along those lines, it's like to build 18 miles of a lane on I-75 is, we know how much that costs.
Right.
We don't know how much it would cost to build a light rail line or
Right.
bus rapid transit line to go to the same place. So.
Well, one of the things. Yeah, go
Oh.
ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the context, but I mean, bus rapid transit, depending what kind of bus rapid transit it is, could be anywhere from 5 to 20 million per mile. Light rail is typically more, but yeah, for 1 mile of urban freeway, the figure I usually hear is about 50 million.
Yeah.
Per.
I can tell you in West Michigan at least, if you're familiar with M6, it's a kind of that connector. Yeah. That's one of the things that would come up. People would be saying this is going to cost way too much. Why are you doing this? And people would remind these opponents that M6, I think it was like $30 billion or it was something insane like that. And you don't get to vote on that. You don't get a say in that. So we take stats like that to give you mode to mode in transit. BRT, the way we look at it, is about 1/10 of the cost of light rail. But you can find capital project expenditure amounts via MDOT. So you can look specifically at stretches of highway, how much those projects cost. And you can also, MDOT's got a short-range 5-year plan and I believe a 20-year plan. I can send you the links. And if you want to, it's pretty wonky, but if you dial into that, they're very specific with their expenditures. And then any transit system, you can look at their balance sheets anytime.